Archangel Michael says, "The night that gathers its shadows is never a sign of surrender but a call to steady the heart and raise the light." The hush that presses against the door of the spirit is a test of presence and the beginning of a fierce, gentle work. The hush must be met with breath, with the memory of protection, and with the determined rhythm of a steady footfall. A hush fell like velvet over the town, and every lamp answered with a small, defiant flame. Each small flame spoke of those who refused to hand over their will to fear and who vowed to keep their living rooms holy. Each flame stood as a sentinel against the cold whisper of coercion and the slow creep of unseen knots. Inside those rooms the prayer was simple and the posture was inward, a hum that filled the chest and stretched to the edges of the roof. No complicated rites were needed, only the honest naming of what one would not accept and the clear setting of a boundary. The boundary was not an act of anger but an act of care for the self and for every child asleep under that roof. The air tasted of iron and rain and the promise that no shadow lasts forever. With a single steady breath people remembered their lineage of survivors and the quiet knowing that light always finds a crack. That remembering grew into courage that was slow and sure and impossible to bargain away. Type Amen to get blessing all different like 333. A bell rang somewhere far off and it was not a summons but a sound like affirmation. The sound called people back to themselves and reminded them of a truth that cannot be erased. The truth was this: that every human heart carries an inner citadel where light can be stoked and sorrow can be tended. Hands clasped in kitchens and in hospital rooms and on buses, and the clasping was itself an invocation. No single word was necessary, only the shared warmth that said we keep watch over one another. That warmth altered the geometry of fear and left less room for the insistent, invasive cold. Outside the windows the world went on with its ordinary clatter and the ordinary clatter kept the night from feeling absolute. The ordinary helped anchor the extraordinary work of turning away what was meant to wound. The ordinary reminded everyone that life continues and that continuity is a kind of protection. A low hum like distant thunder was not weather but the slow congregation of intention. When many wills line up toward the same light a current forms that does not bend to cruelty. That current is steady and patient and it does not require anyone to become perfect. Type Amen to get blessing all different like 333. In a corner an old woman closed her eyes and remembered the names of those who had kept her safe when she was young. Naming became a ritual of reclamation and each name stitched a thread back into the garment of belonging. The threads held, and the garment kept its shape against the tugging of envy and malice. Children slept, unaware of the negotiations. That happened in the world of intent and shadow, and that was precisely how it should be. Their sleep was sacred and the adults around them became the living shield. The shield was made of attention, of small acts and of the refusal to let fear narrate the night. A young man lit a candle and did not speak of vengeance but of setting limits and of restoring balance. His candle was not a weapon but a marker that signaled refusal to participate in harm. The marker held like a compass and it pointed toward steadiness. A mother hummed an old song and the song settled like a balm across the shoulders of those who heard it. Each verse was an affirmation of belonging and every chorus a small defiance against dissolution. The song carried the scent of bread and lavender and the idea that home is built one breath at a time. Type Amen to get blessing all different like 333. The town's narrow streets seemed to gather themselves around a single promise that night, a promise to keep safe what is tender. Lanterns swung gently and their light wrote a map across cobblestone and concrete. The map did not show routes for escape but indicated where attention should remain. People breathed into their bellies and breathed out worry as though it were smoke to be rolled away. The exhale was an offering and the inhale a gathering of resources. Each breath rearranged the immediate world into a living, more navigable place. No ceremony claimed to be a cure, and there was a humble realism in the way people named their limits. They asked for what they needed and they refused manipulation offered in the guise of destiny. That refusal was an act of love for themselves and for the strangers who shared their street. A dog barked twice and the sound was like punctuation, a reminder that life continues in its ordinary cadence. The cadence steadied hearts and reminded them that even the smallest voice matters in the choir. The smallest voice can alter mood and shift the balance toward safety. Type Amen to get blessing all different like 333. A man who had long felt watched lit a small lamp and placed it by his window with careful hands. The lamp was an emblem of clarity and a promise to reoccupy the center of his life after seasons of fear. The clarity spilled outward and reached neighbors who noticed and replied with their own tiny flames. Conversations began without drama and with a plainness that had been absent for months. People spoke of boundaries and of the simple necessity to protect what is flourishing. The plain speech was a kind of armor, dignified and practical. Within a single household a grandmother set a bowl of water and a sprig of rosemary and neither was spoken of as magic but as memory. The items were anchors, not spells, and their presence reminded everyone of the long human history of honoring thresholds. The honoring itself was a sturdy thing. Across the street a child drew shapes in chalk, and the shapes were children's insistence that the world is still for play. Play resists darkness because it reclaims life's most essential posture, curiosity. The posture invites healing in the smallest joints of daily living. Type Amen to get blessing all different like 333. The night wore its surprises lightly and the surprises were mostly good. A neighbor brought soup to someone who had been lonely, and the act was both practical and worshipful. The soup thawed more than just cold fingers and it dissolved an edge of isolation. There was no grand speech given by any authority, power in its softest form moved like a current beneath everything. It was the willingness to be present, to show up again and again, even when fatigue made the bones heavy. That repeated attention became an impenetrable fabric. A child left a drawing at a doorway and the drawing became a talisman purely by the warmth it carried. It was not the picture itself but the witness that mattered, the small testimony that another person cared. That testimony expanded the field in a way that was impossible for fear to entirely consume. A neighbor's cat curled where the light pooled and its contented rumble was a small liturgy. Creatures that are content teach humans how to rest. Rest is not surrender but a way to recharge defenses made of tenderness. Type Amen to get blessing all different like 333. At dawn a chorus of birds declared the ordinary miracle of day and the birds had no allegiance to any human quarrel. Their song was impartial and generous, and it washed the night toward ordinary light. The ordinary light revealed faces in the windows and each face was a testament to endurance. A baker wheeled out loaves and the smell rose like an incantation of the everyday, steadying those who inhaled it. The smell made grief seem less total and it recalled the simple economies of care. The economy of care is consistent and it is a bulwark. A teacher arrived at the school and swept the porch with a motion that was nearly ceremonial in its humility. The sweep displaced the dust of worry and made room for learning to take root again. The action was small and it held the same efficacy as any grand performance. The city bus took its first passengers and the driver greeted them as if each one were a companion on a long journey. The greeting was not performative but sincere and offered a clear sense of belonging. Belonging is a practical shield when other defenses are thin. Type Amen to get blessing all different like 333. A woman who had been afraid to leave her house stepped out to buy milk and returned bearing more than groceries. She returned carrying the fact of her own motion and the proof that movement is possible after paralysis. That proof settled like a stone at the bottom of the chest and steadied her. Neighbors began to trade stories of small resistances and none of them were tall tales but honest accounts of moments when a voice was reclaimed. Each account was a manual not for harm but for careful living. Careful living is the most radical form of protection. In the market a vendor smiled and pressed the fruit into a child's hands with an effortless authority. The gesture signaled that generosity and watchfulness can coexist. Generosity spreads a protective atmosphere through the smallest exchanges. A young couple fixed a loose shutter and in doing so declared that they would mend what could be mended. The act of repair is a refusal to normalize damage. Repair reassigns value to continuity and keeps harm from calcifying into destiny. Type Amen to get blessing all different like 333. An old hymn hummed under someone's breath and its melody softened the edges of the day. The song was not literal armor but it worked like a balm that made the skin less porous to fear. The balm allowed tenderness to remain intact. A group of friends organized a shared calendar of watchful check-ins and the simplicity of the plan made it sustainable. They did not promise miracles but they promised attention. Attention is one of the finest shields available to ordinary people. A craftsman at his bench leaned over his work and thought of the precise way a tool must be held. Precision in small things became a metaphor for the attentiveness one must bring to safeguarding the self. Attentiveness multiplies. Someone planted a small pot on a windowsill and the green pushed through in the face of neglect. Growth insisted on itself and showed that living things seek light. Seeking light is a basic act of resilience. Type Amen to get blessing all different like 333. The day folded toward evening and the town gathered its little lights again as if setting a constellation of determination. Lights were a chorus of consent to be seen and to be protected. Consent to be seen is a refusal of erasure. A woman mended a child's torn coat and the stitches were invisible but important. Stitching bore witness to a belief that investment preserves life. Preservation is central to resistance. A man who had stopped writing years ago found his pen and the return of his sentence was a small reclamation of voice. Voice anchors a life's narrative and makes it less likely to be commandeered. The act of composing a sentence is a restorative ritual. A neighbor laid down a mat and invited the weary to sit and be offered tea without ceremony. The invitation was radical because it was free and without condition. The free offering rebuilds community from the bottom up. Type Amen to get blessing all different like 333. The night deepened but the town's collective pulse was steady, a living metronome. Where attention gathers, fear cannot grow roots that easily. Roots of fear require isolation and secrecy, both of which were being undermined by communal warmth. A lantern was passed from hand to hand and each transfer was a pledge to maintain the flame. Pledges are different from vows, they are practical and repeatable. Practical repetition shapes durable defenses. An elderly couple sat side by side and watched the Street with patient eyes that had learned how to distinguish actual threat from passing noise. Discernment is a cultivated skill and it protects without escalating. Protection through discernment keeps the peace intact. A student rehearsed their lines under a lamplight and the discipline of practice became a metaphor for steadying the mind. Discipline in ordinary tasks translates to discipline in safeguarding oneself. Practice is a quiet kind of power. Type Amen to get blessing all different like 333. The moon lifted like a calm witness and the moonlight traced the silhouettes of guardians on the porches. Guardianship was not militaristic but domestic and rhythmical. It was an ethic of tending. A small group started a rotation of phone calls to check on those who had been alone for too long. The rotation created a predictable pattern of presence that made predatory interference less likely. Predictability is a simple but effective shield. Across the neighborhood someone set a bowl of salt at a threshold not as a charm but as a holdover from ancestral customs meant to mark transitions. The bowl served as a reminder to honor passages without mystifying them. Honoring passages keeps ordinary life orderly and safe. A teenage boy arranged his books and the order made him feel steadier than he might otherwise. Order calms the nervous system and helps a person think more clearly. Clear thinking is the best defense against manipulation. Type Amen to get blessing all different like 333. At the riverbank a woman released a paper boat she had folded with the names of those she loved in it and her motion was a symbolic letting go of fear. Letting go is not defeat but a reallocation of energy toward what can be tended. Reallocation renews power. A community garden was watered and the plants leaned into the attention as if in gratitude. Gardens teach people how to steward small things with patient hands. Stewardship is a long-term strategy against decay. A local musician played a tune at dusk and strangers found themselves smiling at one another as the melody drifted. Music reorients collective mood and makes suspicion harder to sustain. Reoriented moods favor connection over division. A seamstress repaired a curtain and her work restored privacy in a way that felt safe and normalizing. Privacy is a right that shelters the fragile places within households. Protecting privacy honors autonomy. Type Amen to get blessing all different like 333. Archangel Michael says, in the middle of ordinary days the most profound defenses are built. The Archangel's promise is not thunderous but steady and it arrives through the small courageous acts of many. Steadiness accumulates into an invisible shield. Neighbors formed a rotating watch and each night one household agreed to light an extra lamp and listen for anything out of place. The practice was communal and non-judgmental and it created a lattice of presence. A lattice of presence is difficult for malice to penetrate. A woman who feared being judged for her past stepped into a circle of friends who did not condone harm but who offered accountability wrapped in kindness. Accountability and kindness can coexist and their balance protects without shaming. Balanced response cultivates trust. A teacher who had once retreated to silence read aloud to children and the sound of reading re-established a cultural heartbeat. Storytelling is a method of communal education and it transmits resilience across generations. The stories were practical and reorienting. Type Amen to get blessing all different like 333. On a rooftop a group of teenagers gathered and instead of acting out they prepared a small play about ordinary courage. The play did not glamorize struggle but normalized repair. Normalization reduces the power of fear to mystify. A doctor at the clinic scheduled open hours for those who needed reassurance, and the simple accessibility eased anxieties. Accessibility in services is an embodied protection. When caretaking structures are open, exploitation loses fertile ground. A young woman learned to say no aloud, and the word landed like a final seal on transactions that might have cost her peace. Saying no is a reclamation of territory and a refusal to be used. Territory reclaimed makes future incursions harder. A mason fixed a cracked wall, and his mortar held the house together in physical terms and in symbolic ones. Mending the structures people live within is always a form of defense. Sound structures conduct life well. Type Amen to get blessing all different like 333. A poet wrote a few lines about survival and posted them in a shop window, and the lines became a small signal for the neighborhood. Signals align attention and attract allies without fanfare. Alignment organizes quiet power. A midwife checked in on a new mother and stayed until dusk, bearing soup and patience and useful silence. Practical service is ritualistic in its own right because it affirms life. Affirmation is a counterforce to isolation. A cyclist fixed a puncture and kept heading toward obligations, and that steady movement suggested that life does not pause for fear. Motion implies continuity, and continuity defers catastrophe. Moving forward is a protest against being stopped. A librarian stamped books and offered recommendations that redirected minds toward new possibilities. Redirection is preventative because it occupies attention with growth. Growing minds are less susceptible to crude manipulations. Type Amen to get blessing all different like 333. The evenings became a tapestry of small commitments kept without spectacle. Commitment woven every night shapes community temperament. Temperament inclined toward care is resilient. An artist painted a mural that depicted people helping each other, and the mural's presence on a wall functioned as a gentle social contract. Public art can reinforce values without preaching. Values communicated visually are powerful. A volunteer cleared debris from the drain and reduced the risk of flooding that would have left households vulnerable. Preventative labor is a form of protection that rarely receives medals but always matters. Preventative action is thoughtful power. A neighbor taught a child to tie shoes, and in the lesson patience and competence passed like a torch. Skill transmission binds generations and creates sturdy citizens. Sturdiness is a defense against being easily swayed. Type Amen to get blessing all different like 333. A gardener pruned dead branches, and the plant's vitality was restored through thoughtful cuttings rather than violent removal. Correct pruning is a metaphor for the courage to let go of what no longer serves. Letting go cultivates new life. A small school meeting set norms about respect, and the norms were enforced gently and consistently. Norms protect the vulnerable when applied impartially. Impartial enforcement restores trust in institutions. A neighbor sat with someone who could not sleep and kept watch until first light, and that sitting was simple solidarity. Solidarity is a steady, low-cost protection that others often underestimate. Its effects are cumulative. A baker reduced prices for those in need that week, and the small mercy kept families from plunging into desperation. Economic breathing room lessens vulnerability to predatory influence. Mercy is a tactical and humane defense. Type Amen to get blessing all different like 333. A teacher set aside a desk for anyone who wanted to learn for free, and the desk became a beacon for those seeking skill and dignity. Education expands options and options reduce avenues for exploitation. Expansion of options is a social shield. A young parent learned to ask for help and by doing so modeled humility and practicality for their child. Asking for help creates networks and networks are protective. Networks knit a safety net from ordinary threads. A volunteer organized a meal train for recovering families and the steady arrival of meals replaced isolation with reliable presence. Reliability builds trust and trust repels deception. The meal train reinforced belonging. A seamstress taught others to repair clothing and the skill saved money and built self-reliance. Self-reliance is not isolation, it is the capacity to meet basic needs without external predation. Capacity is empowerment. Type A men to get blessing all different like 333. A carpenter built a shelf at the community center and the shelf held donated items that shielded households from scarcity. Communal resources diffuse pressure and limit the leverage of those who would prey on desperation. Diffusion equalizes power. A streetlight was fixed and the return of illumination diminished the allure of clandestine acts. Light is practical deterrence. Illumination clarifies. A mother taught a son to lock doors and it was not fearful instruction but practical training in safeguarding possessions and peace. Simple skills organize life in a way that undermines opportunistic violations. Order prevails. A local herbalist offered safe remedies and clear guidance and the move was rooted in care, not mystification. Knowledge wielded generously protects communities from charlatans. Generosity of knowledge fortifies. Type A men to get blessing all different like 333. An elderly man told stories of how his family endured wars and famines and in each tale there were small, practical strategies for endurance. Oral histories transmit adaptive techniques that survive institutional failures. Transmission is a vector for survival. A youth center opened its doors and offered space for play and mentorship and the presence of supervised activity made predatory spaces shrink. Supervision safeguards the vulnerable by increasing adult involvement. Involvement is preventive. A local council arranged for counseling services and normalized seeking help for trauma and stress. Normalization reduces stigma and increases uptake of protective resources. Access to healing reduces long-term vulnerability. A volunteer repaired a fence and the solid boundary kept animals and harm at a manageable distance. Boundaries are not walls but agreed lines that mark responsibility. Responsibility boundaries keep communities functional. Type A men to get blessing all different like 333. The moon carved silver into the edge of the skyline and people slept with less anxiety because the day had been full of presence. Presence accumulates into a palpable assurance that the next morning will likely come. Assurance steadies actions. Hands reached out to help others and the reach multiplied in small exponential ways. Multiplication of care scales protection beyond individual capacity. Scaling care is a communal triumph. Children woke with laughter and that laughter dissolved residue of dread from the night. Laughter is an immune response to despair. Immune responses keep communities healthy. Neighbors swapped numbers and promised to call if anything felt wrong and those numbers became a lifeline. A lifeline makes isolation less deadly. Connection is a practical shield. Type A men to get blessing all different like 333. A community potluck gathered strangers and strangers became acquaintances who might one day be called on to help. Potlucks are social glue, and glue preserves structure. Structure prevents exploitation. A woman painted a wooden sign that read simply, "Keep watch," and the sign functioned as a reminder to maintain vigilance in kindness. Reminders keep disciplines alive. Discipline sustains protection. A young father read to his daughters, and in the rhythm of the story he reinstituted safety in their household. Rhythm of routine gives children predictability, and predictability lessens manipulative influence. Routine is a shield. A neighbor started a small lending library, and the exchange of books created new conversations and diverting interests. Shared intellectual life builds resilience. Diversion toward growth reduces susceptibility. Type A men to get blessing all different like 333. As the season turned, the community's small rituals hardened into customs that sheltered the most fragile. Customs can be gentle and still hold deep efficacy. Gentle customs create durable cultures. A gardener planted bulbs for spring, and in the act she affirmed a belief in renewal and the future. Renewal projects commitment forward, and that commitment defeats fatalism. Forward commitment is protective. A mentor arranged apprenticeship for a young mechanic, and the apprenticeship offered a path away from risky shortcuts. Opportunities remove pressure points for exploitation. Opportunity is prevention. A neighbor who had been silent for years spoke up, and her voice became a model for others to articulate needs. Articulation clarifies and makes action possible. Clarity is a defense. Type A men to get blessing all different like 333. When storms come, a community's preparedness is measured not by fear but by the arrangements made beforehand. Preparedness is a form of care, and it keeps people intact. Care prevents collapse. People learn to share responsibility, and the sharing diluted the likelihood that any one person would be targeted for blame or manipulation. Shared responsibility equalizes burdens. Equality within duty reduces coercive leverage. A teacher invited students to practice saying their names confidently, and the exercise was small but its ripple was strong. Confidence in self-expression resists coercion. Expression anchors identity. Neighbors made lists of resources and hidden strengths, and the lists became a practical map of help. Maps are navigational tools both for journeys and for crises. Navigation averts getting lost in fear. Type A men to get blessing all different like 333. There came a season when fear attempted to reinsert itself, and the community responded with a rehearsal of all that had worked before. Rehearsal is not repetition without thought but a mindful renewal of effective practices. Mindful renewal fortifies. Children who once flinched at loud voices learned to ask adults for explanations, and the simple protocol prevented miscommunications from escalating. Clear protocols maintain calm. Calm preserves agency. Volunteers organized a nighttime study circle, and the circle's light kept more than books warm. Shared pursuit of knowledge makes people less malleable to crude promises. Knowledge is empowerment. A woman who had felt unseen started a blog about ordinary acts of courage, and readers found solace in the smallness of what was shared. Small acts mature into movements when witnessed. Witness multiplies. Type A men to get blessing all different like 333. The archive of kindnesses grew, and with it an infrastructure that could withstand attempts to break it down. Infrastructure made of goodwill is not naive but pragmatic. Pragmatic goodwill endures. A seamstress taught emergency stitches, and the skill saved a mother's garment and saved dignity. Emergency skills avert panic. Practical competence protects. A local priest opened hallways for shelter during rains and did so without proselytizing, offering space as service. Service without condition reduces the currency of coercion. Unconditional aid is a stabilizer. A youth orchestra rehearsed and the discipline of synchronization taught its members how to listen to one another carefully. Listening fosters mutual respect and respect closes doors to exploitation. Harmony is protective. Type Amen to get blessing all different like 333. Archangel Michael says, protection begins with a single, unadorned intention to keep what is precious safe. The Archangel's words are carried in the ordinary sounds of everyday commitment and not as thunderous decrees. Everyday commitment is luminous and persistent. A family repaired the roof together and in the labor they practiced cooperation and mutual support. Cooperative labor is a training ground for civic kindness. Civic kindness is the mortar in community resilience. A small clinic extended its hours on rainy days and the extension prevented health emergencies from turning into tragedies. Accessibility averts crisis. Crisis aversion is preemptive protection. Neighbors co-created a rota for elderly care and the rota ensured no one fell through cracks. Systems of mutual aid reduce systemic vulnerabilities. Aid systems sustain. Type Amen to get blessing all different like 333. The final chapters of this long night do not conclude with a single heroic act but with 1,000 small continuations of care. Continuation outlives dramatic peaks because it is the daily replication of intention. Replication is generational armor. Lights remain lit and tasks persist and the town slowly learns that protection does not demand perfection but persistence. Persistence, not perfection, sustains people across seasons. Sustained practice becomes habit. If you find yourself called to shield others, begin with attention and proceed with humility and steadiness. Small consistent actions matter more than grand pronouncements. Consistency is the scaffolding of safety. Carry these images as instructions in your pocket and return to them when night feels longer than it is. Keep steady, keep tending, and trust that ordinary people together can form a shield stronger than any solitary fear.